The morning Sylvia Okafor walked into the 41st floor boardroom of Creston Capital Management, she already knew three things. The quarterly discrepancy in the Velacourt account was not a rounding error. The man sitting at the head of the table was the most dangerous person in the room, and absolutely nobody there was going to listen to her. Not today, probably not ever. She set her binder down at the far end of the table, the seat nearest the door, the one nobody fought over, and pulled her cardigan tighter across her chest. February in Toronto had a way of getting into your bones no matter how many layers you wore, and the boardroom AC ran cold enough to store meat. She'd mentioned it twice to the facilities team. Both times they'd smiled at her in that particular way that meant we hear you and we will do absolutely nothing. Sylvia was used to that smile. She was 31 years old, a senior forensic accountant with a degree from Waterloo and a master's from Queen's. And in 3 years at Creston, she had successfully audited 14 accounts, flagged 2 internal fraud cases that had saved the firm a combined $4.7 million, and been passed over for promotion so many times she'd stopped counting at 6. Her direct supervisor, a man named Gordon Ashby who wore pocket squares and said synergies without irony, had described her most recent performance review as solid but unremarkable. He'd delivered this verdict while glancing at his phone. She hadn't said anything. She never did. She opened her laptop, thanked him for his time, and walked back to her desk, where she ate the granola bar she kept in her drawer and stared at the Velacourt numbers until the discrepancy started looking less like an error and more like a door. That was 3 weeks ago. She was still looking at it. The man at the head of the table, the one who'd been introduced to her as Roman Beckett, was not officially part of any meeting she'd been invited to. She'd walked in expecting the monthly compliance review. Instead, she found 8 people she barely recognized, and one man she'd never seen before who clearly owned every square foot of silence in the room. He was younger than she expected for someone who apparently controlled half the private equity flowing through the waterfront district. 40, maybe. Dark jacket, no tie. The kind of stillness that didn't come from relaxation, but from absolute certainty that the world would wait for him. He was also looking directly at her. Not the way men in that building usually looked at her, which was either through her or past her, with occasional condescending pauses when she spoke, but at her with the kind of focused attention that made her want to check if she'd walked into the wrong room. She had not. "Miss Okafor," said Gordon from 2 seats down, not bothering to stand. "This is a closed session. I have the Velacourt compliance report," she said. "I was told it was needed before end of day. You can leave it with Sandra. Sandra is in Mississauga." Gordon's jaw tightened. "Then leave it on my desk." The man at the head of the table spoke for the first time. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that had never needed to raise itself to be heard. "Let her stay." Gordon looked like he'd bitten something sour. "Roman, she's not cleared for." "She brought the Velacourt report," Roman Beckett said. "That's exactly what we need. Sit down, Ms. Okafor." She sat. She should have left. She understood that, in retrospect. Whatever was happening in that room was well above her pay grade, and probably above her clearance level. And definitely above her willingness to get involved in anything that made Gordon Ashby look like he was swallowing a live fish. But Roman Beckett had asked her to stay in the same tone most people used to request coffee, and something about it had made her pull out her chair instead of her good sense. The report she'd compiled was 47 pages. She'd expected to hand it off and be dismissed. Instead, Roman asked her to walk him through it. Not Gordon. Not the compliance director or the head of risk management or any of the 6 other people in the room with actual titles on their business cards. Her. She talked for 20 minutes. Roman Beckett listened to every word. Afterward, Gordon caught her in the hallway. "You're not to discuss the Velacourt account with anyone outside this floor," he said, quiet and sharp. "Not your team, not your friends, not anyone. Are we clear?" "Clear," she said. "And don't read too much into that meeting. Beckett takes meetings with everyone. It doesn't mean anything." She nodded and walked back to her desk and spent the rest of the afternoon trying very hard to believe him. She did not believe him. The thing about being the person nobody noticed was that you ended up noticing everything. Sylvia had spent years cataloguing the small social machinery of Creston Capital. who deferred to whom, which alliances held under pressure, which ones crumbled. She knew that the partnership between Gordon Ashby and a man named Derek Voss had stopped being collegial about 14 months ago. She knew that 3 separate accounts had been quietly restructured in the last quarter with no internal notation. She knew that the Velacourt discrepancy wasn't $40,000, as listed in the preliminary summary, but closer to $6.2 million if you followed the subsidiary trail far enough. She hadn't told anyone this yet. She'd been building the case carefully, the way she always did, layering evidence before she was willing to put her name on anything. She was a plus-size black woman in a Bay Street firm, which meant she had learned early that she did not get the same margin of error as everyone else. When she was wrong, it was proof she didn't belong. When she was right, it was luck or accident or the work of someone else she'd misunderstood. So she triple-checked everything. And then she checked it again. The call came on a Thursday evening when she was still at her desk at 7:30 because the cleaning crew had started to recognize her and leave her a coffee without being asked. Mrs. Okafor. Not a question. Roman Beckett's voice on her work line was so unexpected she nearly knocked over the cup. Mr. Beckett, I'd like you to come to my office tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock. I have a standing 9 o'clock. Move it. She moved it. His office was not in the Creston building. It was in a tower 7 blocks east, all glass and grey stone, with a lobby that smelled of cedar and expensive restraint. The assistant who met her at the elevator was warm in a professional way that felt like the first genuine courtesy she'd been shown in months. Roman Beckett's office had floor-to-ceiling windows facing the lake. He was already there when she arrived, standing with his back to her, watching the ice on the harbor catch the early light. You know what the Velacourt account actually is, he said, without turning around. It wasn't a question either. She was starting to notice he didn't deal much in questions. I have a theory, she said carefully. Tell me your theory. She did. All of it. The subsidiaries, the restructuring timeline, the way the discrepancy grew if you followed the right trail. She laid out $6.2 million in misdirected funds with the same composure she used for compliance reviews. Because the alternative was to panic, and panicking had never once helped her. When she finished, Roman turned from the window. Gordon Ashby has been redirecting capital from 3 separate accounts through the Velacourt structure for 11 months, he said. He has a partner. I believe that partner is using Creston to launder money for a network that extends well outside Toronto. He paused. You've been building this case on your own for how long? 3 weeks. Why didn't you bring it to anyone? I needed to be certain, she said, and I needed to understand who I could bring it to safely. Something shifted in his expression. She couldn't have named it exactly. It wasn't surprise, not quite. More like recognition. Do you know why I asked you to stay in that meeting yesterday? He said. Because I had the report. Because you were the only person in the room who wasn't performing, he said. Everyone else was watching to see what I wanted to hear. You just told me what the numbers said. She didn't know what to do with that, so she looked at her hands. I need someone who can access the internal system without triggering Gordon's alerts, Roman said. Someone with existing clearance who won't raise flags. I need documentation on every transaction in the Velacourt structure going back 18 months. He paused. I'm asking you, Miss Okafor, because you already did it without being asked, and you're the only person I trust in that building right now. The sensible response was no. The sensible response was to thank him for his time, walk out, update her resume, and find a firm in a city where nobody knew her name. I'll need read access to the parent accounts, she said, and I'll need it in writing that I'm acting under your authority. His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. Something more restrained but real. You'll have it by noon, he said. She nodded once and stood. She was halfway to the door when he spoke again. She turned. It was the first time he'd used her first name. Coming from him, it had an odd weight to it, like something considered. Be careful, he said. Gordon doesn't know what you've found yet, but he will. She took the elevator down alone and stood in the lobby for a moment, watching the harbor light on the glass. Then she took a breath, straightened her bag on her shoulder, and went back to work. Gordon found out on a Tuesday. She'd been careful. She'd accessed the documents in batches, spread across normal working hours, timed to her usual patterns. She'd moved nothing, flagged nothing, changed nothing. She was building a picture, not setting off an alarm. But Gordon was also careful, and he had 4 years of advantage on her, and apparently he'd installed monitoring software on the forensic team's access logs that wasn't documented anywhere in the compliance manual. She didn't know any of this when she stepped into the elevator at 5:43 and found him already inside. "Long day," he said pleasantly. "Always." She said, "You've been running a lot of queries on the Velacourt subsidiaries." She looked at the elevator door. 41 floors. "I'm completing the compliance report." "You submitted the compliance report last week. There were items requiring follow-up, Sylvia." His voice had gone quiet in a way that made her skin prickle. "I think you're in over your head. I think you've stumbled across something you don't understand and you're about to make a very serious mistake." He paused. "I'd like to help you avoid that." The elevator opened at the lobby. "Thank you, Gordon," she said, and walked through the doors. She texted Roman Beckett's direct number, the one she'd been told to use only in emergencies, from the sidewalk, with her coat not yet buttoned and the February wind coming off the lake hard enough to sting. "He knows." The response came in 40 seconds. "Where are you?" "Front lobby." "Don't go back upstairs. I'm sending a car." She didn't argue. She stood on the sidewalk with her bag clutched to her chest and watched the traffic on Bay Street move in the early dark, and she breathed in and out slowly until a black SUV pulled up to the curb and the driver opened the door without asking her name. Roman was in the back seat. She got in. The door closed. They pulled into traffic. "How much does he know?" Roman asked. "I don't know. He knows I've been pulling queries. He may not know the scope yet." She paused. "He tried to seem helpful. He used my first name. He's scared," Roman said flatly. "Which makes him more dangerous, not less." "I know." She watched a streetcar slide past. "I haven't finished the documentation. I need 2 more account trails to complete the picture. If we move on what we have now, he'll claim it's circumstantial and he'll be right." "How long?" 48 hours. Maybe 36 if the system access holds. Roman looked at her for a moment. "You can't go back to that office. I have remote credentials. They'll lock them. Not before morning. Gordon will want to figure out how much I know before he moves." She paused. "I would." Another one of those looks. She was getting better at reading them. This one was something between reluctant respect and genuine concern, and it made her feel oddly steadier. "You'll work from my office," he said. "Tonight." "I don't need." It wasn't an offer, he said. It was the sensible arrangement. She turned back to the window. "Fine." They didn't speak again until the car stopped in front of his tower. She followed him through the lobby and up the elevator in silence that was, she noticed, not particularly uncomfortable. He'd ordered food by the time they reached his floor, something from a Lebanese place on King Street that she'd walked past 100 times but never been inside, and he set it on the table near the window without ceremony and let her eat while she worked. He read through documents across the room. He didn't hover. He didn't offer unsolicited observations. He answered her questions when she had them, concisely and without making her feel like asking had cost her something. At 2 in the morning she found the transaction that closed the circuit. "Roman," she said. He was beside her in 3 steps. She showed him the screen. The final subsidiary, the account in Calgary that connected Derek Voss to a shell company, registered in Luxembourg, and watched him read it in silence. "That's everything," she said. "That's the whole structure. Both of them, 11 months of transactions, the Luxembourg connection, 3 other firms they used as transit points." She sat back. "If I submit this to the OSC tonight, the account freezes happen before the market opens. You'd have to sign the disclosure. I know, it puts you directly in the line of." "I know," she said again. "I've been thinking about it since Tuesday." He looked at her for a long moment. "You don't have to do this. Gordon Ashby has been stealing from people who trusted your firm for almost a year," she said. "And he looked at me in that elevator and decided I was too far out of my depth to matter." She met Roman's eyes. "I would very much like to show him otherwise." Something passed across Roman's face, not the controlled neutrality she'd come to expect, but something warmer. Less managed. "All right, Sylvia," he said quietly. "Let's finish it." She filed the disclosure at 2:47 in the morning. By 6 a.m. the OSC had frozen 4 accounts. By 8, Gordon Ashby was in a room with 2 regulators and a securities lawyer who had not been hired by Creston. Derek Voss was unreachable by phone and then, 40 minutes later, reachable by the RCMP at a long-term parking lot at Pearson. Sylvia sat in Roman's office and drank the worst coffee she'd ever tasted from a machine in his assistant's station, and watched the city wake up outside the window and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, which was that she had done exactly what she was capable of doing, and the result was exactly what she'd calculated. Gordon's access to Creston systems was revoked at 9:15. She got the notification on her phone and stared at it for a while. Roman came back at 10. He looked like someone who had made several important phone calls and hadn't slept either, which somehow made him look more human and less like the man who owned all the silence. "The board wants to meet with you," he said. "This afternoon, if you're available. I need to sleep first. They can wait until tomorrow." "Good." She looked up at him. "What happens to my job?" "You don't have a job," he said. "Gordon deleted your file this morning before his access was cut. Your employment record at Creston officially no longer exists." She looked at him. "So I'm offering you a different one," he said. "Director of Forensic Risk, reporting directly to me, your own team. Real authority over what gets flagged and what gets followed up." He paused. "And an office with a functioning thermostat." She was quiet for a moment. "You can think about it," he said. "Take the time you need. I'll think about it over the weekend," she said. "But the thermostat alone is doing a lot of heavy lifting." The corner of his mouth lifted. She had started to look for that. The almost smile, the thing that was small but completely genuine. She found she liked it considerably more than she expected to. "There's something else," he said. He crossed to his desk and came back with an envelope. Derek Voss's associate, the Luxembourg connection, sent a message through an intermediary this morning, addressed to you specifically. She took the envelope, looked at it. "He wanted you to know," Roman said carefully, "that he's aware of who built the case. Is that a threat?" "Probably." She set the envelope on the table, unopened. "Then I'll need that team sooner rather than later. I can have the paperwork ready Monday." She nodded once. She looked back out at the lake, which was iron-grey and cold and exactly as indifferent as it always was, and she thought about Gordon in that elevator, telling her she was in over her head. She thought about 6 years of being looked through, talked past, handed work that disappeared under someone else's name. She thought about the number on her screen at 2:47 in the morning, the moment the last piece settled into place like a bone clicking back into joint. "Roman," she said. "Yes, I want the Velacourt case in my portfolio when the OSC closes it, done, and I want on record that the initial analysis was mine, also done." He paused. "It was always going to be on record, Sylvia. I was going to make sure of it regardless." She turned to look at him then, and something in the way he said it, not as a concession but as a simple statement of fact, the same way he told her not to go back upstairs, the same certainty, made her feel something complicated and warm that she decided to examine later, when she wasn't running on no sleep and cold bad coffee. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "You handed me the cleanest case file I've seen in 15 years of dealing with financial crime. I should be thanking you." "You probably should," she agreed. He looked at her for a moment, and then he did something she hadn't expected, which was that he laughed. A real one, not the contained professional acknowledgement she'd been cataloguing. An actual laugh, brief and unguarded, that changed his face completely. She thought she might be in a moderate amount of trouble. Not the Luxembourg kind, the other kind. The board meeting happened on Friday. They offered her the position formally, with a number attached to it that she had to keep her expression entirely neutral to receive without reacting. The chair of the board, a woman named Helen Osei, no relation, who had the bearing of someone who had outlasted 17 years of men underestimating her, leaned across the table and said, "We should have had someone like you in this role 3 years ago." Sylvia thanked her. She shook the hands offered to her. She took the elevator down alone. Roman was in the lobby. She didn't know if he'd planned that or not. She suspected he had. "How did it go?" he asked. "Well," she said. "Are you going to take it?" "Yes." "Good." He fell into step beside her as they walked toward the doors. "I need to tell you something." She looked at him. "The Voss associate who sent the letter," he said. "We've identified him. He's connected to 2 other cases in Montreal and Vancouver. Your documentation helped crack both of them open. The RCMP contacted me this morning, so it's bigger than Creston, considerably." He pushed open the door and held it for her, and they stood on the sidewalk in the weak February sun, the kind that shows up in Toronto in late winter like an apology. "You're going to need security arrangements. At least temporarily. I know I'd like to handle that personally." She looked at him steadily. "Is that professional or personal?" He met her eyes both. The wind came off the lake, cold and clean. Somewhere down Bay Street a streetcar bell rang twice. "All right," she said. She started walking. He walked beside her. Neither of them said anything for almost a block, and the silence was the same kind it had been in the car, the same kind as 2 in the morning over a lit screen and bad coffee, the kind that didn't ask anything from her, that just made room. She thought about Gordon telling her she was in over her head. She thought about the compliance manager who'd told her in her first year to stay in your lane. Hon, as if her lane were something he had the right to draw. She thought about 6 years of sitting near the door. She thought about the number on the screen at 2:47, and the moment Roman had said, "All right, Sylvia," like it was the most natural thing in the world to treat her as an equal. She hadn't been invisible at all. She'd just been somewhere they hadn't thought to look. The city moved around them, loud and cold and entirely indifferent, and for the first time in a very long time, Sylvia Okafor walked through it like she had somewhere to be. She did. It just happened to be somewhere she'd chosen herself.